Picture this. You're sitting at a trendy downtown bar. It's a Saturday afternoon. The sun is streaming through the windows. There's this giant plate of pancakes right in front of you.
Oh, and you probably have a glass of Prosecco in your hand, right?
Naturally. A glass of Prosecco in hand. And you are staring down at this laminated menu that is just proudly, loudly advertising a bottomless brunch.
Yeah, the classic weekend setup.
Exactly. And, I mean, it feels like the absolute peak of 21st century restaurant gimmicks, doesn't it? Something that was just, born out of Instagram culture, weekend indulgence, modern marketing, all of that.
It definitely carries that vibe. I mean, it feels like a phrase that was cooked up by some team of hospitality consultants in a glass boardroom, specifically designed to separate you from $40.
Right. But that is the exact illusion we are going to unpack today on this deep dive. Because when you actually dig into the sources we've gathered, you find out that this over-the-top everyday phrase isn't a modern invention at all.
Not even close.
No, it is basically a linguistic Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
Because to understand why you are drinking endless mimosas today, we actually have to look at medieval English geography, the gritty economics of 1930 Chicago, and the highly specific slang of 19th century British college students.
It really is this remarkable collision of totally different eras, and to actually understand how these wildly different cultural moments just sort of stitch themselves together, we should look at the foundation first.
Right. The ground floor.
Exactly. We have to start with the adjective bottomless itself, because its evolution over the last 600 years is, well, it's what makes the whole concept work.
Okay, so looking at the sources, they trace the earliest known written records of bottomless all the way back to the turn of the 14th and 15th centuries. And what jumped out at me immediately is that back then, nobody was using it as a metaphor. It was entirely literal.
Yeah, purely literal. It was an observation of physical geography.
Really, just geography.
Yeah. If you were an English speaker in the early 1400s and you used the word bottomless, you were almost certainly describing a profoundly deep body of water, or a chasm, or a canyon.
So you're literally just standing at the edge of a cliff.
Right. You're looking down into the dark, and your eyes simply cannot find the ground. It is, quite literally, without a bottom. It was a word meant to convey the terrifying scale of the natural world.
Wow. Okay. But, humans are fundamentally creative creatures.
Yeah.
Right? And we rarely keep our descriptive words confined to just physical objects.
Well, absolutely. We always stretch them.
Right. So by the time we get deeper into medieval English, the word starts taking on these figurative meanings. People started using bottomless to mean baseless or groundless.
Like an argument without a foundation.
Exactly. So if someone gave you a flimsy excuse or made an argument that lacked a reliable foundation, you would call it a bottomless excuse. But here's the strange part from the sources. They note that this specific definition, meaning groundless, it died out completely by the 1800s.
Just completely fell out of the lexicon. While at the same time, a totally different figurative meaning survived.
Yeah.
Around the mid-1400s, bottomless also began to be used to mean inexhaustible or without limit.
Okay.
So we see it applied to concepts like a bottomless demand or a bottomless supply. And that's the definition that survived all the way to the present day.
I want to stop and look at that for a second, because the actual mechanics of how a word loses a meaning, totally fascinating.
It's like an evolutionary process.
Yeah, exactly. I sometimes think of the evolution of a word like a jobbing actor going to different auditions over the centuries,
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right. So bottomless shows up to the casting call of the English language, lands the role of groundless argument, plays the part for a few hundred years, but eventually, I don't know, the audience stops buying tickets. It gets fired from that role.
But then it auditions for the role of inexhaustible supply.
And absolutely nails it. But wait, here's my question. In the 1800s, the dictionary was already packed. English speakers had words like infinite, limitless, boundless, unfounded. So why did the inexhaustible definition survive while the groundless definition just vanished? What was the semantic gap it was actually filling?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at language not as a fixed dictionary, but as a ruthless living ecosystem.
Ruthless.
Oh, very ruthless. Words act a lot like genetic mutations. A mutation only survives and gets passed down if it offers an evolutionary advantage to the organism, right?
Sure.
So a word only keeps the meanings that offer a distinct practical advantage to society. In the 1800s, English had plenty of sterile academic ways to describe a flimsy argument. The ecosystem for groundless was just too crowded.
Okay.
But the 1800s was also the era of the Industrial Revolution. Society suddenly had this growing, desperate need for a visceral, dramatic way to describe limitless supply, ravenous consumption, and endless demand.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Staring down into a dark, physical canyon that never ends is a much more dramatic, emotional way to describe resource consumption than just saying, infinite.
Right. Infinite is just a mathematical concept. Bottomless is a physical feeling.
That makes so much sense.
The survival of that specific inexhaustible definition was crucial because the English language was unwittingly preserving the exact psychological tool we would eventually need for modern commerce. It laid the semantic groundwork for how we perceive unlimited consumer supply today.
Okay, but it is one thing to use bottomless as an abstract economic term for limitless supply.
Okay.
But nobody goes to a restaurant to consume abstract economics.
Definitely not.
Someone had to physically take this terrifying, majestic concept of a bottomless pit and put it on a diner menu. How does an abyss become a beverage?
For that leap, the Oxford English Dictionary pinpoints a very specific, monumental shift. And it happens in the year 1934.
Chicago, 1934. The very first recorded use of the word bottomless, referring specifically to an unlimited serving of a consumable item. And it wasn't a mimosa.
Far from it. It was the bottomless cup of coffee.
The bottomless cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Offered as part of a 10-cent breakfast in a Chicago diner.
Yeah.
I really want to try to visualize the mechanics of this, because 1934 is not exactly a time of roaring excess. I mean, we are talking about the absolute depths of the Great Depression. Soup lines, economic ruin, massive unemployment.
A very bleak time.
Right. So a 10-cent breakfast doesn't sound like a luxury promotion. It sounds like a survival tactic. Why employ this specific psychological trick when people were completely destitute?
Well, that desperation is exactly why it worked. You have to consider the psychology of a consumer during a severe economic depression. When a person only has a dime to their name, parting with that dime is a major, major decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. Every penny counts.
Exactly. The diner industry was fiercely competitive because there were so few dollars to go around. They had to offer an illusion of infinite value to convince a struggling worker to just walk through their doors.
But they could have just written unlimited refills on the chalkboard outside. Why use bottomless?
Because of the psychological friction associated with the word unlimited.
Friction. How so?
If a menu says unlimited refills, it sounds mechanical. It sounds like a transaction. Think about the physical act. An unlimited refill implies an empty cup, and then you have to actively signal a waitress, ask for more, and wait for her to bring the pot.
Oh, I see.
It implies a limit that you have to ask permission to bypass.
And asking for more when you are broke carries a lot of social friction and shame.
Precisely. But a bottomless cup. That word carries 500 years of linguistic weight. It implies a magical, pre-existing, infinite state. You aren't asking for extra coffee. You are tapping into an inexhaustible well that simply exists.
Wow.
It removes the transactional shame entirely. The hospitality industry effectively hijacked a word that used to describe the sublime majesty of nature and weaponized it to create a psychological safety net for a consumer spending their last dime.
That is such a profound insight. They took the terrifying grandeur of a canyon and localized it inside a porcelain mug to make people feel rich for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And that 1934 Chicago coffee promo is the literal direct grandparent of the loud weekend brunch specials we see today.
It is the first half of the equation, yes. We have firmly established the concept of the unlimited serving and the psychological mechanism behind why restaurants use it.
Right.
But a bottomless cup of coffee is just a drink. To find the second half of our phrase, the actual cultural vehicle, the meal itself, we have to leave Depression-era America, rewind the clock to the late 19th century, and cross the Atlantic.
So we are heading to the United Kingdom to look at the birth of the word brunch. Now, structurally speaking, the sources point out that brunch is a portmanteau, which is basically a blended word formed by merging two pre-existing words together.
Right, smushing them together.
Yeah, exactly. You take the brie from the front of breakfast, you combine it with the unch from the end of lunch, and they meet in the middle. The result is a meal taken mid-morning, usually between 10 and 11 a.m.
It is a very efficient linguistic shortcut. And what's fascinating about brunch is how modern it sounds to our ears. I mean, if you ask the average person on the street, they would probably guess it was coined in the 1990s by a lifestyle magazine.
Hopefully like Sex and the City or something.
Right, but both the Oxford English Dictionary and Merriam-Webster trace their earliest known records of the word all the way back to 1895.
1895. And it wasn't invented by a famous chef or a food critic or some early advertising agency. It started out as highly localized, preppy slang among the students at Oxford University.
Specifically in the dormitories of the Oxford Union.
The sources cite a really fascinating artifact here. It's an article published in the British Independent newspaper on August 22, 1895. And the writer of the article is essentially acting as an anthropologist.
Just studying the youth.
Yeah, providing a translation guide for the strange, quirky slang these college kids were throwing around. The article details what it calls the Oxford tongue.
And it breaks down several terms. It notes that if an Oxford student was referring to their standard morning breakfast, they called it brekker.
Brekker. Okay, it sounds a bit childish, but I guess you can see the appeal.
Then the article notes that when a student wakes up late and makes lunch their first meal of the day, it becomes brunch.
There it is.
But there is a third portmanteau detailed in this 1895 article. It mentions that a tea dinner at the Union Club was referred to by the students as a smug.
A smug.
Yeah.
Okay, let me jump in here because portmanteaus are a very specific type of linguistic gamble. I always think of them like celebrity couple names in the tabloids.
Oh, right, like Bennifer.
Yes, like Bennifer or Brangelina. The media tries to smoosh two names together, but it only sticks if the general public actually buys into the narrative and adopts it.
If it's not useful, it just fades away.
Right. If the public doesn't find it useful, the word dies instantly. So we have this word smug for a tea dinner. It's quirky, it's fun to say. Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Why on earth did a fun word like smug fail, while brunch went on to become a global cultural phenomenon? Why aren't we all meeting up for bottomless smugs on Sunday afternoons?
Bottomless smugs. Well, it ties directly back to our discussion about genetic mutations in language and the concept of functional utility. Slang, no matter how clever or fun it is, only becomes a permanent fixture in the dictionary if it solves a communication problem for society at large.
Okay, so smug didn't solve a problem.
Think about the context. Did the average person in late 19th century Britain, like a factory worker, a shopkeeper, even a standard middle-class professional, did they regularly attend a highly specific tea dinner at the Union Club?
Definitely not.
No. That is an extremely niche activity, limited to a tiny privileged fraction of the population. There was no widespread lexical gap for a tea dinner because most people just weren't eating one.
That makes perfect sense.
The word smug offered no evolutionary advantage to the English language, but brunch was entirely different. Brunch survived because late Victorian society desperately needed a word for that exact 10 to 11 a.m. meal window.
But why then, specifically? I mean, people have always woken up late occasionally. What was happening in the 1890s that made a late morning meal such a widespread necessity?
You have to look at the shifting labor laws and the rising middle class of the late Victorian era. This is the exact period where the modern concept of the weekend begins to take shape.
The actual invention of the weekend.
Yes. Work hours were becoming slightly more standardized, Saturday afternoon leisure time was expanding, and Saturday night socializing was becoming a cultural norm. Consequently, Sunday mornings sleeping in became much more common among the middle and upper classes.
Oh, so they were staying out later and sleeping in.
Exactly. And the traditional, incredibly heavy early morning Victorian breakfast simply didn't fit this new leisure lifestyle. People were getting out of bed later, caught somewhere between breakfast and their Sunday roast. The physical meal existed. People were eating eggs and toast at 11 a.m., but the linguistic container for it didn't exist yet.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and I guess so does vocabulary. We had this brand new cultural habit of sleeping in and eating late, but no way to actually invite a friend to do it. Brunch provided the exact linguistic container society was desperately looking for.
It was the perfect word at the perfect time. And what is truly remarkable is the velocity with which the word escaped the Oxford dormitories. Once the Independent article explained the slang to the broader public in 1895, it didn't just stay localized to students, it caught fire.
Yeah, the sources show just how rapidly it moved. Only 1 year later, in 1896, the famous British satirical magazine Punch picked up the word.
In just 1 year.
Right. They published a piece declaring, to be fashionable nowadays, we must brunch.
Going from dorm room slang to a declaration in a major national magazine in 12 months is an incredible trajectory for the 1890s.
But let me challenge that for a second. Punch was a satirical magazine, right?
Yeah.
Their entire mandate was to poke fun at society. How does a satirical publication actually drive fashion? If they are mocking the word brunch, wouldn't that make people want to avoid using it?
You'd think so, but you have to look at the mechanics of aspiration and social signaling. Satire generally punches up, it mocks the elite, the trendsetters, the avant-garde.
Okay.
So when a widely read magazine like Punch decides that brunch is a phenomenon worth mocking, they are inadvertently sending a massive social signal to their readers. They are confirming that the cultural elite, the most fashionable, connected people in society, are adopting this habit.
Ah. And if you are a middle-class reader aspiring to higher social status, you read the mockery and think, well, if the fashionable people are brunching, I need to start brunching immediately.
Exactly. The satire basically acts as a megaphone for the trend. It cemented brunch not just as a functional word for late breakfast, but as a marker of leisure, status, and modernity. It became aspirational.
You know, you might think the neon signs, the loud music, and the aggressive marketing of modern brunch spots are totally new phenomena designed for our current attention economy. But restaurants fighting for your weekend attention is not new. They have been pulling these exact psychological levers since the 1890s.
Absolutely.
The commercial drive to capture weekend leisure money has always been fierce. As brunch grew from a fashionable Victorian trend into a standardized weekend ritual over the decades, the hospitality industry faced a constant need to innovate and outcompete the diner down the street.
They needed a hook, a competitive edge in an increasingly crowded market. Because if every restaurant on the block is serving eggs at 11 a.m., how do you convince the consumer to choose your table?
And that is the moment of synthesis. That is where our two separate historical timelines finally crash into each other. Eventually, some restaurant owner looked at the aspirational leisure class appeal of the British brunch and decided to smash it together with the gritty psychological survival tactic of the 1934 Chicago Bottomless Cup.
If we pull all the way back and look at the whole picture, the phrase bottomless brunch really is a masterpiece of linguistic engineering.
It really is.
It is the ultimate marriage of etymology, psychology, and economics. You take a 600-year-old word that originally described a terrifying, physically infinite abyss. You let it mutate through the Industrial Revolution until it conveys a visceral sense of inexhaustible supply.
Right.
You weaponize it during the Great Depression to remove the social friction of poverty and offer the illusion of infinite value. Then you mix it with a highly functional, smushed-together piece of slang invented by 1890s British college students, which became a global symbol of weekend leisure.
It's just wild.
And you package those two incredibly resilient linguistic survivors together as an irresistible modern restaurant promotion.
When you recap the incredible journey like that, it completely reframes how you look at a simple, laminated menu. I mean, we went from literal 14th century canyons to Victorian workers navigating the invention of the weekend to Oxford students trying to sound cool and edgy, all the way to 1930s diners pouring 10-cent coffees to keep their businesses afloat during an economic collapse.
It's a lot of history for one meal.
And it all culminates on your table next to a plate of pancakes this weekend.
It is a brilliant example of how we don't just use words. Words are tools that shape our behavior. But, analyzing the birth of a word like brunch leaves me with a rather provocative thought about the mechanics of language today.
Oh, what are you thinking?
Consider the trajectory we just mapped. Brunch was originally a silly, disposable piece of slang mashed together by college kids in 1895. It was almost certainly rolled eyes at by the adults of the era, who viewed it as a corruption of proper English.
Oh, I'm sure they hated it.
Yet that disposable slang somehow survived to become the defining anchor of a multi-billion-dollar global hospitality industry. It makes you wonder, what seemingly ridiculous, highly localized slang words are teenagers inventing and texting to each other right now?
Wow, yeah.
Which of those throwaway terms will survive the ruthless ecosystem of language to dictate entirely new industries and consumer behaviors a century from now in the year 2126?
That is a fascinating lens to look through. It shifts your perspective on literally every new internet phrase you hear. We tend to dismiss teenage slang as fleeting or annoying, but we might actually be listening to the foundational vocabulary of the next century's economy.
Exactly.
The words they are throwing around in group chats right now could be the bottomless brunches of the future. So the next time you are sitting at that downtown bar and you're reaching for your Prosecco, just remember, you aren't merely eating a meal. You are participating in 600 years of linguistic survival of the fittest.
I'll definitely be thinking about that this weekend.
Thank you so much to our listener for bringing such rich, incredible source material for today's deep dive. It has been a fantastic journey, and we will catch you on the next one.